Matt Whitaker, former U.S. Acting Attorney General.
This is such a great conversation about America, our future, what's going to save our republic.
We have a great football player. Matt Whitaker is here. Matt.
They tried to bury me. They didn't realize I was a seed.
It's a touchdown. Whitaker.
Former Acting U.S. Attorney General.
Under President Trump.
I'm going to be an unwavering supporter of law enforcement.
Welcome to Liberty and Justice with your host, Matt Whitaker.
Hello, Australia. Hello. Good day, mates. How's that? That's about all I know. It's all the Australia I know. I know more. It's good to be with you. Thanks for inviting me here again. I came last year, as many of you remember, and it was my first time here, and I loved your country so much I came back. So I'm going to now share with you my 25-point plan for saving the world. It's only going to take about an hour and a half. By the time we get to the end of it, you're gonna be an expert on how we do this. Actually, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to reconcile the Reagan three-legged stool with the America First movement. And I'm going to talk about, a lot of you have said to me, what the hell is going on with conservatives and Republicans in the United States? And I'm going to try to explain it to you. And I'm going to use my friends at the New York Times to help explain that. Because I think it's interesting. I think if you dig into what Ronald Reagan stood for and what Donald Trump ran on, won on, and is running again on, you understand what modern conservatism and what makes up the Republican coalition in the United States, of which I'm a proud member. But first, let's talk briefly about Republicanism under Reagan and his three-legged stool. As many of you that are well-versed on this know, he had economic conservatism. He brought that coalition together. He had social conservatives in his coalition, and he had national security, strong national defense coalition. Now, some, I believe, have bastardized that into a neoconservative movement. But I'm going to explain to you why that's probably wrong. First, in his economic conservatism, it's very traditional conservative. Lower taxes, smaller government, free market capitalism. We're going to get into trade in a little bit, but free market capitalism. I think that's one of the linchpins in this whole difference between Reaganism, Trumpism, and really the future of the Republican movement in the United States. Social conservatives, very straightforward. Typically Christians, family values, people that value life from natural birth until natural death, people that value religious liberty and our ability to worship however and whomever we wish. And then finally, on the national defense, the strong national defense leg, which I would argue is not neoconservatism, it's just a strong military. Actually, it can be summarized in something Ronald Reagan famously would say, and that is peace through strength. Well, what does the New York Times tell us is the current Republican coalition? Well, there's actually, instead of three legs to the New York Times conservatism, New York Times Republicans, there's six. So it's kind of like one of those mythical six-legged animals from the Greeks. It includes what they describe as the moderate establishment. That sounds very sensible, right? That's probably their preferred group. And the moderate establishment is exactly what you're going to expect. I think some would call it Rockefeller Republicans. I wasn't alive in that period of time of Rockefeller Republicanism, but it's very genteel. You could put like Susan Collins and Chris Sununu in that group of the genteel, moderate establishment folks. You know, they're probably could also be called globalists. They love things like the United Nations. They love these multinational global groups. They love going to maybe, I don't know, the World Economic Forum in Davos, that type. You know the type. And then we have, I'm not defending them, I'm just saying what they are. And then we have what I would call what the New York Times calls the traditional conservatives. And this, as you can imagine, are people like Marco Rubio and Rick Perry and Tim Scott, just kind of your good government, low taxes conservatives. And then I think, because of the term is so fun, the next group is the right wing. Yeah, you're probably part of the right wing, by the way. I know I am. Anyway, the right wing is people like Ted Cruz and Newt Gingrich, Christian conservatives, those types. But the interesting thing about those types is the New York Times describes them as saying that America stands on the precipice of disaster, is what they believe. Well, I think America does stand on the precipice of disaster. With Joe Biden in charge, with the left where they're leading the United States. And traditional conservatives and the right wing together, so the group that includes Rick Perry and Tim Scott, together with the Ted Cruz, Newt Gingrich types, that makes over 52% of the entire right coalition. Every other group I'm going to describe, the moderate establishment, about 10%. Blue-collar populists, which are actually where I feel the most affinity for, that's the working class. Those are the people that Donald Trump, especially along the Mississippi River in the Midwest, places where I'm from, those are the people that came over. They're the old Reagan Democrats, if you remember. And those folks, I think, have made the biggest difference. As the Republicans in the United States have pushed out corporate America and their woke ideology in the interests of blue-collar working-class Americans, I think that has made the Republican Party stronger. And while the New York Times estimates that makes about 12% of the coalition, I think it is the heart and soul of the coalition. And we need to make sure we have policies that address their concerns for working-class America. Now, there's two other groups, and again, they're small, about 10% or even less. And one of those groups, as according to the New York Times, is the libertarians, the libertarian conservatives, the Rand Paul types. And they are a meaningful type, and what they believe is very simply is that liberty trumps everything. Any other policy is trumped by individual liberty. And there's some attraction to that ethos. It's just in the real world, sometimes there are things you got to get done, and sometimes you have to look at what they're pure, and I respect that about them. But we have to always welcome them to our coalition, consider what they have to say, because they are also an important part of ultimately a winning coalition. And then finally, you have a group that the New York Times names it. I think it's more of a grab bag. They call it the newcomers. Then they say that somehow Vivek Ramaswamy, who's running for president, is part of the newcomers. But it's kind of this group of Gen Z, of sort of these new conservatives that maybe the New York Times would suggest they don't know what they believe, so that's why they find themselves in the Republican coalition. I think it's actually they look at the other side and think those people are wackadoodles, and I'm not like them, so I'm gonna be like these folks. And so, that's what the coalition is. But remember, in each one of these, they are uniquely still part of that three-legged stool, because it's not demographics necessarily, it's not age, it's not geography, where you live in the United States, because again, Midwestern, Western states Republicans are different than the East Coast, and you find a lot of the genteel, moderate establishment folks on the East Coast, of course, because they're well-educated, well-heeled, silk stocking folks, not like hard scrabble cowboy boot guy like me. But nonetheless, Texas is a good place to find not a lot of these establishment types. But the most important thing is what unites this six-legged stool, as the New York Times describes, and that is what's the most important political issues right now in our time. And the number one thing that Republicans care about is the economy. And, Bill Clinton was no conservative, but he did say famously, it's the economy, stupid, and it is. It is. It is most important that people have jobs, that people have a good income, a wage that is increasing, and a government that supports policies that promotes economic growth and development. Second, immigration is a very important issue in the United States, and building a border wall is probably going to be front and center of this next general election. Because you are not a country without a border. You have no country if you don't have a border that you defend and respect. And Joe Biden has just created a turnstile at our southern border where whomever and whatever wants to come to our country can and does. And it's created chaos, it's created dysfunction, and it's affecting every state in the republic. All 50 states are a border state now. I think the third issue that is continuing to be a challenge in the United States is violent crime in our major cities. And conservatives, Republicans, have a unique difference with our opponents, the Democrats, and that is we back the men and women of law enforcement. We support tough on crime policies. We want to get the worst of the worst, the most violent people off the streets. We don't want to give them a free pass and back into society so they can commit more crimes. And so the third policy that right now is the most important for Republican voters is our current crime problem, supporting law enforcement and pushing back against what's happening in our major cities. I think the life issue is always going to be important. And obviously with the Dobbs opinion in the Supreme Court and overturning Roe v. Wade after 50 years, that is playing out in unexpected ways. However, that's the way it was designed. If you read the Constitution, it never addressed this issue. The Supreme Court 50 years ago had found these rights in penumbras and emanations, if you remember famously the Supreme Court opinion. And this Supreme Court said, quite frankly, this founding fathers never intended this to be in the Constitution. If you want to have it in the Constitution, there's a process for amending the Constitution. It's not, and so it goes back to the states, which is, again, the way the system works. And I'm okay with legally with that working. And again, it's in my home state, we passed a 6-week ban. In other states, they've done other things. But that's the whole idea. I talked yesterday just about these laboratories that each state is able to do. And again, it is not everything is a national issue. The Democrats love to run to either the courts or the federal government, depending on the issue, and pass a one-size-fits-all solution to what they perceive the problem to be. But that was never intended the design of our beautiful Constitution. And then finally, I have to just, talk a little bit about parents' rights and the importance of the ability of the parents to decide their children's future and how that is playing out across many of our states, and how woke ideology and indoctrination in our schools in the United States is something that needs to be pushed back against, and is an important issue for Republican voters. So finally, I'm going to set the stage before I get into the Make America Great Again or the America First agenda that is really the heart and soul right now of the United States Republican Party and, really many of the campaigns for president in 2024, is that polling right now shows that those issues I just outlined, those kind of 5 issues, are the same issues for independent voters, which are going to sway these elections. And so Republican issues, conservative issues, are the same issues that independent voters care about as well. And that's a real opportunity in 2024. Now let's compare and contrast all of what I've said with the America First agenda, or what some people call MAGA. The first thing that MAGA stands for is economic prosperity. Okay, lower taxes, jobs, economic growth. In about 6 more months, we're going to be hoping for a little bit of that, the way Joe Biden's running this current economy. At 7% mortgage rates, more than doubled in the last 2 years. But the number one principle of the America First agenda is economic prosperity for all. And that's why when I talk about those Reagan Democrats that are now blue-collar Republicans, that's the most important issue. And we should always be laser-focused as policymakers on the American worker, just like your politicians should be focused on Australian workers. The second leg in the America First agenda is America First. Now, what's that mean? Because if people hear that and be like, "Oh, you're so arrogant. All you care about is America, you know, in the USA and your red hats." No. Obviously, trade is important. And free trade is also important, but it has to be fair at the same time. And I don't blame Australia for, and we're never even close to the worst offender on taking advantage of the United States of America. Because again, we believed and still believe that our trading partners that we have close relationships to are our allies. But Europe was taking our lunch and completely exploiting this relationship. After we fought 2 world wars with them, and after we can count the world wars, but 2 that were declared world wars, so Europe had to be sat down and chatted with about what free and fair trade looks like and is, together with their NATO commitments as well. And obviously immigration we need an immigration system, not that, we welcome, the United States of America is the most generous country in the world for immigration. We admit legally 1 million people a year to lawful permanent status. We just need an immigration system that's, 1, orderly, and 2, and more importantly, serves the American interest. We don't need to take every unskilled person that wants to come to our southern border. We need to have the best and the brightest from around this globe that want to participate in the United States economy, welcome them, and make sure that they have a way to participate. And finally, foreign policy-wise, the America First agenda on foreign policy is not America alone. It is a strong United States, a strong United States military that we don't send across the globe to put out every brush fire, but that works with our allies to keep the globe and the world safe and secure and prepared for the next threats. And I would also say the America First agenda stands in complete contravention and opposition to the rise of Communist Chinese Party and its global interests to be the world dominant factor. Also, I mentioned strong borders, but that is a pillar of the America First agenda. That is a strong border, a strong southern border, especially a wall across the southern border where appropriate and necessary, other deterrents where you don't need a wall, quite frankly. And then finally, the America First agenda includes a patriotism, a love of your country. For us, it's a love of the United States of America. It is standing for the national anthem. Unlike many of our women's soccer team that came to your country that were unwilling to stand for the national anthem and celebrate their country. Obviously, that patriotism also supports our military and our veterans. Very important to, again, the security of the globe. And then finally, it stands for the rule of law. It stands for a system of justice that's a one-tiered system of justice, that everyone is equal under the law, that there aren't folks that are under the law. Nobody's above the law, but certainly no one should be under the law. Because at the end of the day, the challenges we face are massive. The United States has not been a great steward of its amazing and abundant resources. But as I said yesterday on the stage, and I will conclude, and I want to give you some hope that the United States of America is not down and out, that the United States of America is actually on the rise, that we are getting our act together. And that is, we've had dark times in American history, as you know. The left loves to remind us of some of those dark moments. But you know, I was just finished reading a book on the War of 1812 and what happened when the British came to the United States, sacked Washington, D.C., burned the White House, chased the president out of town, then went to Baltimore and tried to take Fort McHenry, which our famous national anthem was written about the bombardment of Fort McHenry, and then finally went to New Orleans and met Old Hickory, got their asses beat, and the Second War of Independence was won by the United States of America. And ever since then, the United States has been a global leader. And I want to say the United States is a great global leader currently. But we need our allies, and we need to trade, especially our allies in the Pacific, like Australia, Japan, the Philippines, and others, with the same kind or even better treatment than we treat our European allies who could care less about the United States. So when folks come to your country like me and say you have no better friend than the United States of America, we need to back that up. We need to support our allies. We need to spend more time with our allies. We need to visit places like Australia and build those bonds, those friendships like I have been doing over the last 2 years. So together, we can do this. Believe me, together we can do this. Our best days are ahead of us. There is hope for the future. There is hope that no matter what challenge we face, together, we will overcome those challenges. And remember, your unlimited potential is just on the other side of your fear. So thank you so much for having me here in Australia. If you keep inviting me back, I will keep making the 14-hour flight. It's very easy. But I appreciate your friendship, and God bless the United States of America, and God bless the beautiful and great country of Australia. Thank you.